Hi there, it's Lucas Catton, and I am back with the next installment of the Narconon and Scientology Chronicles. This one is regarding Narconon Arrowhead and the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Now, the history between these organizations go back to 1990, 1991 era, when Scientology reached an agreement through its organization, ABLE, which is Association for Better Living and Education, for a long-term lease on a property in north central Oklahoma, outside of the town of Newkirk, Oklahoma, at the old Chilocco Indian School. And that property was owned by what's known as the Five Civilized Tribes. And so they reached an agreement, and there was a lot of fanfare and hoopla that Narconon was going to open a 1,000-bed facility in Newkirk, Oklahoma. And they came in and did all the stuff, bunch of PR, rah, tooted their own horns, things like that. Well, they believed they didn't need to be licensed by the state of Oklahoma because they were on tribal ground. They thought they were on sovereign territory and that they could just do whatever they wanted. But if you know anything about the history of Narconon, they are purely just a Scientology-based rehab program, and they don't use traditional licensed counselors or therapists. So the state of Oklahoma said otherwise and said, no, you do have to be licensed. And they declined licensing them. Narconon then filed a lawsuit against the state of Oklahoma and the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and a battle ensued. And it was costly for both sides. Shortly after that, Narconon realized that they could get accreditation. And there are two main accreditation bodies for the substance use treatment field. One of them is the Joint Commission on Accreditation, also known as JCO to a lot of people. And one of them is called CARF, which is also known as the Commission on Accreditation for Rehabilitation Facilities. So they wound up getting CARF accreditation for the program and asked the state to basically keep their hands off and say, look, we've got accreditation. How about you keep your licensing to yourself and we'll just do our thing. Both sides dropped their lawsuit, and they didn't go any further. Narconon continued to operate out of Chilocco all the way up until, for the next 10 years, really. And they stayed very small until the mid to late 90s, and they started to grow. And then they got a grant from the International Association of Scientologists to purchase the building, which became Narconon Arrowhead, down in Canadian on the shores of Lake Eufaula. And it was to become eventually a 250-bed facility. So during this whole process, there had to be a re-engagement with the state of Oklahoma, because the state said, look, we've looked the other way for 10 years now. We don't really want to fight, but we gotta have some oversight. We have to do something. And by that time, I was working in public relations and government relations for Narconon Oklahoma, and I started doing things in Oklahoma City. I started attending various events and meetings where representatives of the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse were there, coming in contact with Deputy Director Ben Brown at the time. The director was Terry Klein at the time, or the head of the agency at the time. And so there was lots of good relations being created. And they said, look, we want to certify you. We want to help you. We'll provide technical assistance. We'll come in. Well, Narconon and the reports that would go up through ABLE and the Office of Special Affairs for the Church of Scientology, also known as OSA, they're paranoid. Their legal team's like, no, they're out to get us. These evil psychs, that's what they call them. They're just out to do us in. We can't let them in and inspect our program. So they tried to negotiate some type of an agreement to say, okay, well, how can we come together and find something? So what they wound up getting was an inspection and a license of just the drug-free withdrawal unit. So that's only the very first step of Narconon, of the program, is when somebody comes in and it's minimally a 24-hour observation if they're completely free of any substances, up to as long as it takes, sometimes weeks for people to withdraw, depending on what it is that they're on. So they came in, Department of Mental Health, they inspected that, and they issued a license for non-medical detox only. And Narconon then said, "No, look, hey, we're licensed by the state of Oklahoma," and continued their CARF accreditation, which doesn't inspect program operations in terms of what type of counseling do you provide. It's more of a what other types of regulatory processes do you have in place from your organization. Whereas the state even audits intake records and counseling records and things like that. So along come a series of deaths at Narconon Arrowhead. I no longer worked there at the time. And huge scrutiny of the program, which there should have been. The state has to do something. And at least one of these deaths occurred in the withdrawal unit, which the state has oversight of. One of the inspectors came out, Kim Poff, which you can look it up. Just type in Kim Poff and Narconon, and you'll see that her report was a recommendation of severe handling of them. And they ignored it because they didn't want to go back to battle in court. The state of Oklahoma did not want to go back to battle in court with Scientology. And so they shied away from it. They wound up firing Kim Poff, in which she sued the state and eventually won a $200,000 judgment for wrongful termination. So she makes her report. They fire her. She winds up winning that. Like, things continue to come down the line. They never take action. The state never took action against Narconon. They issued like a temporary warning or something like that, or some very, very low level things. By that time, I think the commissioner was Terry White. And so it wasn't even, the previous people in terms of the administration. And it was this ongoing situation where Narconon didn't want the state involved. The state didn't want to get involved, but they had to because legally they're required to. And one of the biggest things, the main reason why Narconon doesn't want the state involved in their general operations is because they don't have or believe in using people that are considered professional treatment staff, which are people with master's level degrees who are licensed to deliver counseling and therapy in this way. And you need those in order to bill insurance, for example, for some of these counseling things. Now, we're going to do a whole different video on insurance fraud, but this is specifically about this. So things continue to go along. They sweep it under. Narconon implodes. There's a mass exodus. Eric Tenorio and I go on Rock Center. There's Anonymous is all over them. There's all kind of news stories that are happening. There's Tony Ortega and all his reporting. There's Gary. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The attorney who represented the wrongful death cases and many other cases at the time, and there was big news all over the place. On top of that, we'll do another video on this. The National Association of Forensic Counselors filed suit against them for falsifying counseling certifications. So there's this huge mess. And if you go on Google Maps right now and take a look at the Narconon Arrowhead property in Canadian, Oklahoma, the picture of the property is empty. And this went from over 250 people enrolled in the program, clients enrolled in the program, they called them students, down to about 12. And all the cabins that surround the lake were filled with staff. There were over 200 staff and trainees there. They're all gone. It really became a ghost town. And since then, they've been trying to crawl back in quietly and do some things. But if you go on the Department of Mental Health's website now, go to ok.gov/ODMHSAS for the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and take a look at search for Narconon or search for the zip code 74425, and you pull up the listing of Narconon Arrowhead. And now finally today, I don't know when this changed, but I just found it. Now finally today, if you go on there, it actually states, for the first time that has ever been known, despite them denying it for all this time, it actually states on the website, Narconon Arrowhead is a Scientology-based treatment facility licensed for non-medical detox and adult day services or something like that. But but it specifically says Narconon Arrowhead is a Scientology-based treatment center. And that is the first time in any government official website that I've seen, finally, where they did that. And there's lots of things in between. There was, the additional insurance fraud investigations that I'll get into and share some stories about that. And there was the grand jury investigation that kind of coincided with all this. So there's lots of different parts to this, but specifically with the Department of Mental Health and Narconon, they're still there. They've come to some kind of agreement. The department has taken a little step and finally said, look, if you're going to operate, if we're going to give you any kind of licensure at all, you're going to have to admit that you're Scientology based and not based on, other psychological services. So it's there. So I encourage you to check that out. And I got lots more stories that I'm going to share. Until then, take care.